Good morning, everybody. I have a Bible story today about a guest of honor. So I get to be a guest of honor sometimes when I travel. For those of you who don't know exactly what my job is, I lead a group of fundraisers for World Vision. And so I get to travel all around the world in support of this work. And the way this trip usually works is that I'm traveling with a donor who has made a really large gift to help a community somewhere. And so because I'm hosting that person who's traveling, when I'm traveling, I get kind of treated at the same place of honor that this giver is being given as they're traveling. So it's almost as though I'm the one who's made the $5 million gift to put in water systems in 2 districts of Ghana, and not the other person. So I really get treated with a lot of deference and respect and welcome. And it's frankly it's somewhere between humbling and embarrassing sometimes the way that I get treated when I travel, just because of what that dynamic is like. So in April, I went to Ghana, and it's always a shock to the system when you get on an airplane in April in Seattle, and it's 52 degrees, and it's overcast, and you step out in Tamale, Ghana, and it's 106 degrees and humid. It's like a completely different planet from the life that you're used to living. So here I am. It's our first full day in the country. We're going out to this community where this gift has been happening, and the community, they love to be able to extend a welcome to their visitors, to the people who are supporting their work, right? So you get out there, and they had an overhang. So it's like 11:30 in the morning. It's 106 degrees and humid. But they did have an overhang for us, right? So we were sitting on plastic chairs on a concrete floor. You know, it only felt like 130 or something, because we were not in the direct sun. And they put you in this is the place of honor, and they seat you in these seats. And then they're often they have dances, community dances, different ceremony that they love to do for their visitors, and it's great. And it's really fun, and of course, we as the visitors we have our cameras out, and we're filming the dances, and we're enjoying it. And at this time, this is in April when I visited, I suddenly got this terrible realization during this dance, because they walked up to me, and they were carrying this huge, thick cloak, and I was like, oh no. And so they had me and this donor that I was traveling with put on these cloaks. So these are woolen cloaks. I'd estimate they're about a full inch thick, the heaviest possible item that you can imagine. And so they had us put on these cloaks and get up to dance with them. So I have 9 hours of jet lag. It's 130 degree heat index in the shade. And now I'm wearing this wool layer that thick, and I'm supposed to dance. And so this is one of those moments where you want your heart to be filled with appreciation for the gift of hospitality you're being offered, but then actually inside you just want to die more than anything else. And so I just gave the worst possible dance that I could possibly muster in that moment. This is such a gift to be here kind of dance. So being that guest of honor is not necessarily all it's cracked up to be. And in this story today, Jesus finds himself caught into something as the guest of honor that gets a little uncomfortable. So, by the way, we talked last week about Francis of Assisi and how the call to send out the 72 disciples, the call to go out without a staff or without an extra tunic, how powerful and impactful that was for him. And so this is actually in the same chapter of Luke, so just a little bit after that, when now the groups of disciples are going out. So, starting in verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. And the story starts really warmly for Martha, right? This is her home that's being opened up. And she's the one who's primarily responsible for the hospitality that's being extended and for the hosting. And so she's opened her place for Jesus. It's been a real gift of sacrifice for Jesus. But the two sisters here have very different things on their mind at this moment. So you have Mary sitting at Jesus' feet, and you have Martha running around feeling stressed about the preparations. One thing I noticed going back to this passage this week, this line, that Martha comes to him and asks, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Something I really noticed this time is that it's not just a complaint to Jesus about what the sister is doing. The sister is not helping, and now I'm doing twice as much work because my sister's not helping me. It's also a complaint about Jesus. Jesus isn't helping her the way that she wants Jesus to help her. Don't you care, is what Martha has to say to Jesus. So it's not only complaining to Jesus about her sister, it's complaining about Jesus in this line. And I think the question that she is answering Jesus and what she's really wrestling with is, don't you value me the same way that I value myself? Because I value this hard work and putting on a great hosting arrangement and being hospitable and making this event run smoothly. That's what I care about. And here I am working. Don't you value that about me, Jesus? I think it's really good news that Jesus doesn't value us like we value ourselves. When I think of how I whipsaw between self-pity and self-idolization, self-disgust and self-regard, going back and forth between all those things and how I look at myself, such a gift that Jesus doesn't value me the same way. But actually, he values us how he loves us, which is utterly, and it's based on relationship. What a gift that is. Jesus says to Martha, "Few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." It's not that few things are good, or few things are useful, or he doesn't appreciate the service, but it's not the thing that's needed somehow. Because Mary's there for relationship at Jesus' feet. And Martha, at that moment, is not there for that. So we always take a time machine when I give a message. The time machine is not going to go as far back today, only to 1930, and not as far away either. So in 1930, in Kansas, there was a baby born, and her name was Anne. She was born to a big family near Wichita, Kansas, but when she was 5 years old, her family uprooted this big family and moved out to Springfield, Missouri, where they settled down. Anne was someone who was an excellent student. She was a hard worker, and she decided when she had a decision about where to go to college, she decided to stay close to home. So she went to Southwest Missouri State. The school's been renamed since then, but this is the university in Springfield, Missouri. And this is a photo of her, taken from the year 1949. So she was the president of her sorority, which is called the Kappa Omicron Phi, and someone who was already being put in positions of leadership as a college student. But Anne had something else on her mind. In fact, it was about wanting to serve Jesus. And it was quite a religious family that she was part of. She had an older brother who was considering becoming a priest, and she was interested in becoming a nun. So in Springfield, there was this center called the Academy for Girls, and it was run by an order called the Order of the Visitation. And at the age of 20, Anne decided to join this order. So when she entered the order in 1950, she was given a job teaching in the elementary school. So we had an elementary all the way through high school here at this center. There was also a library and a religious education office where she worked. So, quick note about this group called the Order of the Visitation. So, the full name is the Order of the Visitation of Holy Mary. And what that refers to is the moment when, in the story, the Christmas story, when Mary goes to Elizabeth and the baby leaps for joy. And it's this beautiful moment of tenderness and sharing and sisterhood and anticipation of motherhood and all those things that are happening in this moment. And the kind of joy in that story is the joy that this order wanted to honor. So it is, compared to what we were talking about last week, it's a younger one. It's 400 years old. It was started by a man and a woman, both named Francis. And the motto that they have is Live Jesus, is the model of this order. But I want to tell you about some things that Anne lost when she was Sister Anne, but especially when she was Mother Anne. So the first is this. About 50 years ago, there were 200,000 nuns in America. And today, there are 40,000 nuns in America. So that's a reduction of 80% over just 5 decades. And so the kinds of things that these religious orders try to do, a lot of them are kind of falling apart because of lack of workers. So that's something that Anne was faced with all of her life. The other thing, anyone care to guess what the average age of a nun in America is? Anyone want to take a guess at that?
85.
It's 80. 80 is the average age of a nun in the United States right now. So you have to know those two things to kind of understand like what happened and why in this story. So in 1964, this Girls Academy closed because of lack of workers to keep that model going, and the school was turned into actually a retreat center in Springfield, Missouri. And so they hosted visitors for a while and had a different model for what the sisters were doing. But again, there were fewer and fewer of them to run this retreat center, and they had to sell the building. The building eventually, actually, it's a bed and breakfast today. You can go visit it, and you can stay in the building where the order used to be. At the same time that she was working there in Springfield, Anne was a very high-performing, sharp person, and she kept getting leadership opportunities. By this point, she became the Mother General of the entire Order of the Visitation in the United States. So it was a real position of authority over what was happening. At the same time, though, we talked about last week, there are these things called the evangelical councils. It's the vows that you take, and one of those vows is you take orders, right? It's the vow of obedience, and you have to go where you're told to go. And so she was told to move across the country when this retreat center closed. And so she did. She moved to another retreat center called the Center, and similarly, they hosted a variety of retreats over the course of 20 years or so. But by the early 1990s, there were only 8 nuns left, and it wasn't enough to keep the retreat center going. And so they were wondering what's the future for this center. And they were wondering, maybe part of the reason that we're having trouble attracting people now to this life of this order, maybe the reason is that it's too much work now and not enough devotion. Like people wanted to have contemplative lives and reflect, but now we're asking them to spend all their time feeding people and running this little retreat center. Maybe that's not the right life. But there was another blow that happened right then, which is that at age 60, Anne became sick with cancer. So she was the leader of the retreat center. There's only 8 nuns, they're very elderly, and now she's sick with cancer. So the decision was made to sell the building and to close the center. Another sister said at the time, "God's ways are not our ways. In the mystery of his love, he has indicated that the time has come for new beginnings." So Anne lived for 3 years with cancer, and during that time, when she became quite sick, for hospice, she was moved to a center called the Manor, where Anne died mostly among strangers, although of course the sisters would come to visit her sometime. After she died, Anne's remains were moved back to Springfield, Missouri, where she had spent a good chunk of her life. And she was buried with her other sisters in the order, her spiritual sisters. I think it's a little hard for us to understand what that daily life was like when she was working at the center, so I wanted to briefly explain it. So the structure of the day is built around what's called the Liturgy of the Hours. It's these 5 separate little services throughout the day that have some scripture, some worship, some reflection time built in, and that's every day you do the Liturgy of the Hours. There's also Mass on top of that. There's 90 minutes of meditation every day. That sounds like a lot for those of us whose attention span is 3 minutes. But beyond that, you're running a retreat center, so there's the counseling, supporting, taking care of all the guests and their needs, and there's the upkeep for the building and grounds. The accommodations that Anne lived in were very simple and Spartan. On the plus side, there were some lovely trees around the center where Anne worked, and there was a great view of the Puget Sound from behind the building. You might have realized by now who I'm talking about and what I'm talking about. Anne was the Mother Superior for the Sisters of the Visitation at Dumas Bay in this building. And she was the dying Mother Superior who was on point when this retreat center was closed and the nuns were dispersed again, the surviving nuns. So today, in a very meaningful way, we are in Anne's house. This particular part of the building is new, but the rest of it that you see, the older blue structure, that was the retreat center that Anne was leading. So last week and this week, we're talking about religious orders. And we talked about a couple that were far away, started far away and long ago, and then one that actually happened literally in this building as recently as when this building was bought by the city of Federal Way. This call to orders, sometimes as someone who didn't grow up with this idea of there being religious vows, I have trouble understanding where it comes from. I don't feel like I follow it very well. In the Old Testament, you have the Levites are a priestly class, but they don't choose that, right? You're a Levite because you were born a Levite. That's how you become part of the Levites. Now there was in the Old Testament, there was the Nazarites. Anyone remember the very famous Nazarite from the Old Testament, who that is? Samson, that's right, that's Samson. And you took a special vow to be especially dedicated to God, and you kept some rules around meat, around not cutting your hair. And it was similarly, it was a religious vow, although it was only temporary, right? Like you had to keep renewing that vow if you wanted to continue to be a Nazarite. And in the New Testament, there's nothing quite like it either. There's people living a hermetic life of reflection, like John the Baptist, but nothing that we would call like a religious order. And so when I think about the vows that both men and women take when they're going in to join religious orders, remember they're obedience, chastity, and poverty. The question I find myself asking are these vows that are just for the people who are like choosing the hard way? Are these actually things that God is calling all believers to commit themselves to, regardless of whether or not they've made special vows or in a special class of people? Because the vow of obedience, isn't that saying that I'm not the master of my life, that I recognize a different authority that I'll follow when things are hard? And the vow of chastity, isn't that a confession that all of our desires need examination and have to be compared against what is really best for us and best for others? And the vow of poverty, aren't we all called to not hold our things tightly, but to look at what we have not as possessions, but it truly is just a gift to be shared that belongs to God already and will always belong to God, regardless of whether and when we give it. It's all God's. So in obedience, there's a yielding of our will and authority. And in chastity, there's a tempering of our impulses and our desires. And in poverty, there's a releasing of our grip on the things that we have. Or to put it another way, God's calling us into new relationships with everything. God's calling us into a new relationship with our Creator. God's calling us into a new relationship with our desires. And God's calling us into a new relationship with our things. And that's the form of these vows that's actually incumbent on all of us if we're trying to follow Jesus, not just a select group of people who have special vows. It's a universal call. In the story of hosting Jesus is the guest of honor with Mary and Martha. Martha's not wrong to have prepared for this, of course. It's a way to honor Jesus and show respect, to try to prepare and give excellence to them. But she's gotten so busy that she's missed Jesus when he's actually there. Like, the thing that you've been preparing for is here now, and she's lost sight of that. Because true devotion is a call into relationships. It's not just a call into activities. And that devotion needs to be centered not on ourselves, but on Christ, who's there. So some things that I've noticed about Christ-centered devotion, and thinking specifically about Mary in this story. So Christ-centered devotion is drawn to Christ's feet. So what does it mean to be at Jesus' feet, like Mary is here? The Dutch master Vermeer painted this painting of this story back in 1650s. Well, sitting at someone's feet is just demonstrating that, like, you're longing to be there. That it's your willingness and connection is just, like, I imagine if Taylor Swift walked into a room and there were a bunch of young people there, how eager they would be to sit down and listen to her play and just to be close. And it's that sense of humility and attention that's so powerful. So what Mary is exhibiting is this affection and a trust and a vulnerability of being there at Christ's feet. It's like being at Jesus' feet is a sort of homecoming somehow, because it's the place that she belongs. It's also a meeting place for other people who are longing to be at Christ's feet. It's a place of worship. And that's the sort of space that a Christ-centered devotion calls us into. Christ-centered devotion, it may seem distant, but it's never far out of reach. Sometimes it sort of seems hard to imagine how we could be completely devoted to Jesus, but I think it's very near to us in a couple of different ways. One of them is just like the example that I gave with Mother Ann today, who literally in this building for decades there was this effort to sit at Jesus' feet. Also, around the people that you've known, the Jesus people in your life who have influenced you and who have cared for you and who have prayed for you, they're really not that far away either. But even more than that, we're being drawn into that kind of intimacy. Not just that it's available to us, but there's a pull that's coming from a God who loves us and who values us. I love this from Revelation 3:20. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. Christ-centered devotion, paradoxically, I think, it doesn't need a witness, but it does call us to come together. There's a sense in which being devoted to Jesus is really solitary, and it should be solitary because it's not for performance for other people. It's just out of affection and connection and respect for your Creator. But at the same time, I think every example we see of people being devoted to Jesus, whether that's in the Bible or it's in history, people aren't just separate on their own. It's not just a me and Jesus adventure. People are constantly being drawn back into community at the same time. Why do we have to be drawn back into the community? Why can't it just be me and Jesus? Because we need the encouragement of being together with believers. We need the friendships and the care for each other that come from being a part of a community of believers. And we need the accountability that comes from being part of a community of believers. Because the me and Jesus thing, if you just go on with it for a long time, just tends to become me if you're not together with a real community of Jesus people. And so even though it's, in a sense, solitary, at the same time we're being called to come together. Another factor with Christ-centered devotion, it's available to everyone, but it never costs nothing. So I think there's in a profound way, following Jesus and accepting grace is the freest possible thing in the universe. It's available to everyone, no matter what you have done, no matter what you have said, no matter what you will do, and no matter what you will say. It is truly a free gift that is available to all of us. That Jesus is at the door knocking. But it's good news that God's not content to leave us in sin and in misery and hopelessness, but is calling us to a restoration, these new relationships with our Creator and with our desires and with each other and with our things. And over and over in the New Testament, you see people being confronted with the opportunity to find Jesus. And fishermen, what do they have to do? They have to walk away from their nets. And the tax collectors, they have to make it good with all the people they've cheated. And the people who are like the young man, the prince who has great wealth, he's asked to have a completely different relationship with money if he wants to follow Jesus. And anybody who has authentically tried to come to Jesus, there's something to give up. And how could there not be? How could we be totally ready and totally right in our current life, in our current state of mind? Because we wouldn't be coming to Jesus in the first place if we had it all right. So built into following Christ, there's a sense that something will be lost. But there's joy in that losing for the people who are able to do that, I think. I love this from a parable, Matthew 13, Jesus says, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then he, in his joy, went and sold all that he had, and he bought that field." And I think for the people who are able to follow that call that God's asking them to and coming to him, there's such joy in it. And the people who go away sad are the people who don't make that choice, like again that rich young ruler who's not ready to give all that he has to the poor. Christ-centered devotion, it sets us apart from our culture. At the same time, it connects us across space and time. So if you ever, at any time in the history of the world, try to really follow Jesus, really do what he calls us to do, it's going to make you countercultural. Whether in your relationship what it's like with authority, or what your relationship is like with money, what your relationship is like with your behavior, your desires, all those kinds of things. It's never going to be perfectly aligned with any earthly society. So there's going to be something about you that will be different. And so that's what holiness is, right? It's called to be set apart. That we get called to be set apart in some meaningful way. But at the same time, the reason that I love thinking and talking about Christian history, and one of the reasons that I love to travel around the world and meet Christians in different places, is that the possibility for connecting across space and across time is extremely profound, actually. C.S. Lewis wrote about this a little bit when it comes to Christians recognizing each other. Lewis says, these people, these faithful Christians, they're dotted here and there all over the earth. Every now and then one meets them. Their voices and faces are different, stronger, quieter, happier, more radiant. They will not be very like the idea of religious people which you have formed from your general reading. They do not draw attention to themselves. You tend to think that you are being kind to them when they are really being kind to you. They love you more than other men do, but they need you less. When you have recognized one of them, you will recognize the next one much more easily. And I strongly suspect that they recognize one another across every barrier of color, sex, class, age, and even of creeds. In that way, to become holy is rather like joining a secret society. To put it at the lowest, it must be great fun. I think you have a sense of what that means if you've had an opportunity to travel and to be in a completely different culture and meet people who follow Jesus. I just want to share another travel story for me. So on a different trip, I was in Tanzania, and this trip, it was sponsored by a secular foundation. The group of people that I was traveling with, it was not World Vision, so it was not like, we were not an explicitly Christian group as we were traveling. It was a secular group. And we visited this community, we went to a farm and saw an agricultural project, and then we were walking through this little village afterwards. And it was Sunday morning. And we walked by, and there was a church there, and there was this like vibrant worship happening at this church that we were walking by. And here I am, I'm walking with my peers, right? These are like fortunate, wealthy, educated Western people. Like these are people with master's degrees from Ivy League schools, and people who can travel just for pleasure, and people who have resources, and people who have gym memberships, and that's like those are the people that's the life that I live, right? And I was walking by this building, and I poked my head in, and I'm with this big group of people, and the energy and the joy of what was happening in that worship in this little village, I had this incredibly profound sense that, oh, those aren't my people. These are my people. And I wanted to stay. And, I had agreed to be part of this group. I couldn't easily walk away and throw out the workshop that I was part of. I had a job to do there. But my heart just stayed. It just stayed right there, because recognizing when people are worshiping Christ, connected in worship, honoring the Creator, that connected me with them instantly. And I've had the gift of getting to travel all over the world, and in dozens and dozens of countries, I've had the opportunity to meet Jesus people. And every time I do, I feel a little bit of what Lewis talked about. There's this sense of it's like this secret society of joy that you share with someone. And culturally, there might be an enormous gap between the two of you, or personality-wise, or all those other things. There's gaps. But there's connection there too. And it's profound, and it's eternal. If we believe the Bible, that sense that we feel in meeting a Jesus person, that's an eternal connection, not a temporary connection. Christ-centered devotion, it doesn't ask us to earn what we've been freely given. I love to be here next to that sign, live out of being loved by God. There's so much call to good works and good actions, and being Martha in the story, and being hospitable, and working with all your heart no matter what it is. There's so much of that, of course, in the Bible. But the good news is that the devotion that's truly centered on Christ, and that's true, it's not based on our little works that we do, but it's based on His great work that has been done for us. It's not based on our little faithfulness and whether we've kept our vows, but it's based on His great faithfulness. I think there's so much hope in that. Paul writes in Ephesians 2, "We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." Works of duty, works of sacrifice, I think all of that just melts together, with faith and works melting together as one thing, and duty and devotion coming together as one thing, when we recognize that all of it is just a coming home. It's being called to be it's returning to be what we've been created to be, to the relationship that we were intended to have with God, and to the relationships that we were intended to have with each other. And instead of having this weight of having to keep our vows, we have the joy of serving in the way that God calls us, because He loved us first. And this is love, that He loved us first. That it's just all coming home to a great and a faithful Creator. So let's pray together. God, I pray that You'll give us eyes to see and to connect to and to appreciate all the devotion to You that's been around this world in the past, in different times, today, and in different places. We want to recognize the beautiful work that has been done, because we want to honor and worship You. God, we are so grateful that the call You have to us is based on love for us. And the way that we can serve you best is not out of being the best at keeping rules, but just to live out of being loved by you. And I pray that even today, I pray for everyone around here today, I pray that there'll be a moment today where they'll connect to someone and they'll have that eternal recognition that comes from being with someone who loves you and who has opened the door that you're knocking at and who has felt the call of your grace and who has welcomed you in. God, I pray that we will have that today for our encouragement, but more than that, God, for your glory. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.